Hey everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks. As I promised, now I'm going to be jumping into the gameplay analysis of how some of the least popular, but also somehow the popular tier 10 medium tanks in the next patch are going to be, in this case, in the 121's case, substantially buffed. So I'm playing on the 1.10.1 test server, which I outlined all of the extra changes that are going to happen in the next update of World of Tanks, while everything is still subject to change yesterday. So if you haven't seen that video, go and watch that video first and then come back here and get your dose of 121 gameplay. So how is the 121 changing? Well, as you all know from yesterday, its penetration is going up by 4mm on its standard rounds. However, every single one of the vehicle's shell velocities on all three of its kinds of ammunition is going up by 12%. And so that means that while previously your shells would have 1,000 meters a second shell velocity, now your shell velocity is going to be 1,115 meters per second. That's very decent indeed. That will allow you to be able to just get that little bit of an edge against moving targets at long ranges. How frustrating is it to play the 121 in vehicles like the UDES when you're trying to engage vehicles at decent rounds? A lot of people who load the heat rounds on their vehicles and they don't have premium APCR rounds like the Leopard will know that when your shell velocity drops, it does become exceedingly hard to be able to engage your opponents effectively when they're moving left and right. So that will definitely help out the 121 a little bit. But really, one of the big changes to the 121 will be the power to weight ratio. It's gaining 70 extra horsepower on its engine, going up from 580. Doesn't sound very good for a tier 10 medium tank that, as you would expect with the 120mm of armor that this vehicle has and a very thick turret, it's not a lot. It gives this vehicle a sub 15 power to weight ratio currently, which is going to be improving to 16.67. Not too bad. The 121 is definitely not going to be the fastest medium tank in the game, but it's going to help. It's definitely going to help for this vehicle to be able to get up slopes. Now, this is a very interesting moment of the game, because you're going to be seeing that even though the armor of this vehicle has been buffed, as I'm going to highlight in a second, it has not been buffed enough so that you can absorb heat rounds even from a TVP, or that you can absorb gold rounds from the Leopard. So as we can see, those heat rounds from the TVP went right through the front of the hull. And even though Wargaming have buffed the armor of this vehicle from 120 up to 135 inside the next patch, yes, this one's getting a 15mm buff on the upper hull armor, the heat rounds from the TVP there still able to go right through the front of the tank, even when we were kind of angling it upwards. I guess he might have been a little bit above me, so maybe it was kind of like a flat surface. But as I'm going to show you, actually I'm going to show you right now, I'm going to show you just the armor and how the vehicle has changed on the 121. So, as I said, the hull armor has changed from 120 up to 135, but how does this actually affect the way that the hull on the 121 will play out? Well, here is the 121 from the next patch of World of Tanks. If I show you the live model here, its upper hull is about 230mm of effective armor. Now, if the vehicle's using its gun depression and it's also angling its armor, well, now it's going to have about 270mm of armor, which will mean that it has about a 40% chance to be penetrated by the 262mm of penetration that this tank will have. However, as with the TVP there, if he fires heat, yeah, he's pretty much going to be going through it at least the majority of the time. But every little helps in this case, and it will allow the 121 to be able to take a few more rounds of penetration, well, a few less rounds, hopefully entering the hull from the premium rounds on the enemy team. But really, where the armor is going to be useful is against the tier 8 and tier 9 tanks, and all of the tier 10s that refuse to fire gold rounds at the vehicle. That's where the 135mm of upper hull armor that this vehicle has will be very useful indeed. Now, one thing that the 430 has always struggled with is how it competes with the 430U. Really, the 430U pushed this tank into obscurity to a point where nobody really wanted to bother with it. It wasn't the fastest, its hull armor didn't really work apart from against ultra low tier tanks. It did have the alpha damage. When it first went into the game, it was the highest alpha damage medium tank, hitting for 440, very nice. Right up until all of the other heavy tanks started to become just as fast as this, and they were packing at least 440 alpha, if not higher. And so the 121 definitely started to struggle. It struggled to be able to compete. And how How fitting is it that we're actually shooting up now into the biggest contender against this vehicle? But while the 430 has had its turret nerfed, and it's also lost a few of the dispersion values that the vehicle has, now that the 121 is going to be getting a buff, we might be seeing that this will actually, funnily enough, be the kind of competitive vehicle compared to it, or maybe even the more competitive tank. Although we don't really see the armor holding up very well in this game. Alright, so the standard rounds on this vehicle, 122mm caliber gun, the highest on any medium tank, is very useful for being able to overmatch 40mm plates, like the STRV-103B has. And so we're able to actually track the Stridsvagn 103B, but also be able to enter his side armor here while it's very angled. And just look how wonderful that is. We were able to put in about 1,300 to 1,400 damage to the STRV-103B just like that. And that is where having this 122mm is just so much better than all of the other medium tanks. And one of the reasons why heavy vehicles just seem to be able to lob shells at vehicles at awkward angles and still be able to go through them more than medium tanks and your light tanks will, even if they do have similar amounts of penetration. Although, by the looks of it, when you're trying to penetrate an Object 268 version 4, looks like you're still going to struggle with that. So I'm trying to decide what is the right play now. Is it to go after the STRV, or is it to try and go after the IS-4? And I can't believe that low roll. All we needed to do was to roll for 416. But we low rolled from 440 down to 412, although I can't really complain because my previous 4 shells were all high rolls, so I guess we were destined for a bit of a low roll. But that, unfortunately, was the one that counted. But just look at the 121 here. This is something that not a lot of people appreciate about this tank, is that it actually has a very good damage per minute. The damage per minute on this vehicle at 2,700 is much better than the E50M, because while it has exactly the same rate of fire as the E50M does, 6.25 rounds a minute, the output damage of the vehicle is 50 higher, which means that when this thing gets going, yeah, you can kind of see what the results are. The problem is, of course, is that right up until the next patch, everything else about the vehicle has just been not quite there. It didn't have the upper hull. It didn't have the power to weight. And even with the improved power to weight, do you see how poorly we're doing? Now, you could put a turbocharger on this vehicle, but the dispersion values are so bad that you can't really drop vertical stabilizers, and the view range isn't anything special on the tank, so you probably need to be using coated optics and vents, or what are you going to do? Give up the gun rammer? Maybe you want to just use vents, a gun rammer, and vertical stabilizers. You really, with the new equipment inside the game, it doesn't change the fact that you've got to try and pump up your view range as much as possible unless you want to become a close quarters combat tank. So we noticed that we're about to get flanked by an ST2. Luckily, I was able to react to that, turn my hull around, and be able to avoid the shell from the ST2. Now we take a gold round from the mouse from above, which was a little bit painful, 516, meaning that we now have 8 hit points. But oh, what's this? Another thing that has been buffed about the 121. And that is that the hit points have gone up from 1,950 up to 2,050. And what that means is that if this was the current patch of World of Tanks, I would be dead. I would have had 92 hit points too few to be able to survive the shot that hit my vehicle from the mouse. I would have probably blamed the good roll, or I would have cursed my luck for the mouse not low rolling against my vehicle, and I would be inside the garage, and undoubtedly my team would lose this game. However, the hit point buff to the vehicle kept this tank in it, allowed us to weather the shot from the mouse, and now we can try to win the game against the 2 top-tier heavy tanks on the enemy team. So just, all in all, really good days for the 121, right? The hit points, the top speed, the tiny penetration buff on its standard rounds should save you a few credits from just having to fire gold rounds all the time, or just help you when, frankly, armor-piercing rounds are going to be better against some angled surfaces, or especially spaced armor. All of these things are going to make the 121 more competitive than it's ever been, and it might be an opportunity for you to be able to dust off this tank. In fact, the 121, as we shut down the mouse there and get revenge on him for the shell that he put into us earlier, is probably going to be, statistically, one of the better vehicles from this update. The E50M and the Object 140, which I'll be covering in the subsequent days on this channel, are just not really getting the kind of love that the 121 has. Maybe arguably because the 121 is the underperforming vehicle in the current patch of the game. So that's why the 140 and the E50M aren't quite getting as much love as this tank is. So what you see me doing now is using the new communications feature to try and communicate with Dr. 2683, who plays from the Russian server, as to what my plan is to try and deal with the ST2 here. However, doesn't look like I've got enough time to be able to go around, and that's because Doctor is looking like he wants to go after the ST2 and try and lock him in place. But of course, that tier 10 Soviet double-barrel heavy tank will be able to launch the 2 barrels in to be able to kill the E50M, but luckily he distracted him for just enough that we slipped over the top of the ridge and we shut down the ST2, securing a top gun. And wow, what's that? 8,500 combined in this 9-minute round? Sure, it's a test server. People do play a little, should we say, lazy on the test server, and they're a little bit frivolous with their hit points. But still, for the buffed 121, for this to happen very early in my play session in the tank, I wasn't complaining. So a top gun here for that 5,700 damage that we dealt, and an ace tank of a 1,396 base experience. I wasn't running a premium account on the test server. If we had, we would have actually made about 10,000 credits profit. Instead, we actually lost 21,000 credits. But I think I was actually trying to fire as few premium rounds as I needed inside this game, and I was probably one of the most free-to-play players playing the test server that day with the amount of premium rounds that you saw hitting this tank. But that also gave us an idea of what will happen to the 121's armor if it is getting pelted by gold rounds, and that is that only one didn't penetrate, and that was because I think that it actually hit our tracks instead of our hull. We didn't actually ricochet any damage. And really, is that any surprise after I show you the armor model of the 121 as to how it will take its heat rounds? Unless they miss your cheeks or they just miss your hull altogether, it doesn't really matter how well you're angling this vehicle, it's pretty much going to be going in. But on the other hand, if they aren't dabbing the 2 key and loading the gold, we can see that the turret armor is actually substantial on this vehicle, and even the weak points on this tank will be quite troll, and you'll have about a 40% chance to be able to bounce off them unless you hit right in the center or towards the top of the tank. So all in all, are the changes to the 121 gonna catapult it to being the best tier 10 medium tank in the game? I think that might be a little bit of a stretch. However, undoubtedly, they are substantial buffs to the tank, and so if you love the vehicle right now, clearly update 1.10.1 is going to be great news for you. Alternatively, for all of the 99% of the other players out there who haven't really considered this vehicle, because you've probably felt that by playing it, you're kind of handicapping yourself compared to if you were playing something like the Object 430U. For all of you players out there, this vehicle is definitely looking like it's going to compete more readily with the tier 10 Soviet medium tank that up until about 6 months ago I would have clearly recommended for everyone to be able to get first inside the game. And if after seeing this vehicle today and the new statistics that the vehicle has and you don't yet have one inside your garage and you're thinking about making your way towards one, well, hopefully you saw the video yesterday which highlighted that the tier 7, 8 and 9 are also getting substantial buffs. So don't jump out there right now and grind your way through those vehicles, because next patch they're going to be even better, and so the grind will be easier for you then. So it's probably worth waiting unless you absolutely utterly have to have a 121 for release day so you can be playing it on the first day that it has its new statistics. And while I personally, being an owner of the 121, can't wait for the buffs to try and add some relevance to a vehicle that really has been just gathering dust inside my garage, on the other hand, I kind of get a bit worried about just the constant buffing of all of the vehicles inside the game. Every vehicle's getting faster, every vehicle's got higher penetration, every vehicle's got higher armor. But some of the key core principles of World of Tanks, like the view range, the fact that it's capped at 445, well, not the view range, sorry, the spotting distance is capped at 445, and that the maps aren't exactly getting any bigger, at least in the regular game mode that I think the vast majority of players enjoy the most. There's no doubt that all of these buffs can't come at the expense of power creep and the game just becoming quicker and quicker and quicker, which is definitely a cause for concern, and I truly hope that Wargaming are accounting for this with all of the buffs they're giving these vehicles. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that's it for today. Hopefully you enjoyed this one. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And if you haven't seen my video from yesterday on the 1.10.1 update, just the quick version of it, go and check that one out. And stay tuned, as tomorrow I think we're going to be looking at the Object 140. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.